Hi, I'm doing this video in defense of Catholicism. Peter is the first pope, and the evidence for that is, for one thing, that Peter's name change involves the analogy of being the foundation for the church. Upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. That is a foundational statement. And also, in the same story, Christ gives Peter authority. Whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. This is a very foundational statement to the authority of the Pope, and also this is where the Catholic Church gets the concept of absolution for sins, comes from this statement. But now Christ goes on more to deal with Peter in the role of Pope. After Christ's death and resurrection, he asks Peter if Peter loves him 3 times, and Peter says yes. And Christ says, tend my sheep, feed my sheep, tend my sheep. Now this is actually a very important thing, because before, Christ called himself the Good Shepherd. Now the Good Shepherd is saying this of Peter, that Peter is a shepherd. And part of the tools that Peter has and has passed on to future popes is the role of shepherd, and that is played out at councils. Councils are a very important tool for the Pope to shepherd the church, to shepherd the flock. Now there's also one other thing about this that's important about the analogy of shepherd, is the fact that Christ says, tend my sheep, feed my sheep. So while Peter is the shepherd, Christ is retaining, you might say, ownership of the flock. That is a very important point. That is why the Catholic Church claims to have Christ as its head. Okay, now at the Great Commission, Christ told the church to spread the gospel to everywhere in the world, to all nations. Except there's a problem drew out of the way that Christ phrased this commission, and that is, Christ said to spread the gospel to all nations, but he never specified if a person had to become Jewish, if a Gentile person had to become Jewish in order to be a Christian, in order to follow Christ. So now what do they do about that? Peter assumes the role of shepherd by holding the Council of Jerusalem, and after a lot of discussion on this issue, only then is it documented as Peter standing up and giving some words on this, and part of which grew out of the vision that Peter had about a sheet falling from the earth and God telling him to kill and eat, for do not call anything that is created of God unclean. That vision came to Peter, and when Peter cites that vision in the council, that pretty much settles the issue. Notice that no other member of the council is documented as getting that vision. So therein is part of the problem with Sola Scriptura, is the fact that if we are only to look to Scripture for matters of faith and morals, then how to handle this passage of the Council of Jerusalem? Because of the fact that it is in Scripture, then Sola Scriptura teaches that holding councils is a valid action. Now, years later, what happened is each town started to have its own little canon of, or library of, books considered inspired of God. But this caused its own problem in that each town, since each town had its own little library, there was no way of common discussion about the faith. What were the tenets and what were the beliefs that were supposed to be universal to all Christian members? So what they did was they held a series of councils, the Synod of Rome, the Council of Nicaea, and the Second Council of Nicaea. And they got together and they addressed the situation, and eventually they arrived at a canon, of which we get all of the books that are in the New Testament. Now, this is where Sola Scriptura kind of really gets weird, in that if we are not to look to Scripture, or if we are not to look to councils for guidance, not to look to councils, then what does that say about the Council of Nicaea establishing the canon of Scripture we have today? To me, it would seem like we are to throw out the Council of Nicaea, the Synod of Rome, but then if we do that, what scriptures should be considered defensible by Sola Scriptura? Where does it end? So therein is a problem. That is why I believe Sola Scriptura teaches against itself. So anyway, this is why I am Catholic, because the Catholic Church is the only church I have found where all of this makes sense. And I cannot find any way of looking around this. So I look forward to your responses. Thank you much. Bye.